Time is the ultimate destroyer of evidence. When a brutal crime is committed, investigators are locked in a desperate mathematical race against the clock. Every hour that passes degrades the physical telemetry of the scene. Witnesses forget. Alibis solidify. Blood washes away. But what happens when the clock doesn't just advance by days or weeks, but by decades? What happens when an entire century passes and the perpetrators simply walk away, leaving behind nothing but locked filing cabinets and families screaming into the void? Over the last 80 years, the American and international justice systems have investigated millions of homicides. Most are solved through basic forensic deduction, but scattered across the decades are the anomalies, the cases that completely defied the authorities, embarrassed the police departments, and terrified the public. We are about to open the vault on 8 decades of classified history. 8 unsolved mysteries. One single terrifying pattern. Someone committed the perfect crime, and they got away with it. From a Hollywood cover-up in the Roaring '20s to a highway phantom whose ballistics are still active in federal databases today, these are the cases they tried to forget. Which decade holds the darkest secret? Watch the evidence unfold and decide for yourself. Welcome back to the Wayne Archive, the digital vault where we tear the redaction tape off the files the justice system abandoned. In the realm of true crime, closure is a luxury that is rarely afforded to the victims of highly organized predators. Today, we are not looking at the famous serial killers who were caught, tried, and executed. We are looking at the phantoms. We are tracing a chronological timeline of absolute forensic failure, moving decade by decade from the 1920s through the 1990s. We will analyze the corrupted crime scenes of early Los Angeles, the grim railway stations of Depression-era England, and the terrifying empty highways of the modern American Midwest. These cases share a singular, chilling reality. The killers lived their lives, walked the streets, and likely died of old age, completely unpunished. Lock your doors, pull the blinds, and let's step into the timeline. The first era of our forensic descent takes us into the birth of modern criminal investigation, a time when fingerprinting was in its infancy, DNA was science fiction, and crime scenes were routinely trampled by reporters, corrupt officials, and wealthy fixers. The 1920s, the Hollywood director and the erased crime scene. In the Roaring '20s, Los Angeles was a chaotic, unregulated boomtown, and the Hollywood studio system operated with the absolute power of a sovereign nation. On the morning of February 1st, 1922, the body of William Desmond Taylor, one of the most powerful and prolific pioneer directors of the silent film era, was discovered on the floor of his upscale Alvarado Street bungalow. He had been shot once in the back with a .38 caliber revolver. But the true horror of the Taylor case is not how he died. It is how the truth literally vanished without a trace before the police even realized a murder had occurred. When the Los Angeles Police Department finally arrived at the bungalow, they did not find a secure crime scene. They found a house overflowing with studio executives, actors, and corporate fixers. The studio bosses had arrived hours before law enforcement. They were actively burning documents in Taylor's fireplace. They were removing bottles of illegal Prohibition-era liquor, searching for blackmail material, and stuffing Taylor's personal correspondence into their coats. By the time the detectives established a perimeter, the physical telemetry of the room had been completely sanitized. Highly prominent actresses like Mabel Normand and Mary Miles Minter were deeply entangled in Taylor's private life, and items belonging to them, including nightgowns and highly compromising love letters, were allegedly scrubbed from the scene to protect their million-dollar box office appeal. Witnesses reported seeing a strange individual, dressed in a heavy coat and a muffler, calmly walking out of Taylor's apartment shortly after a loud bang was heard, but the description was completely useless. Because the studio system valued its public relations over the pursuit of justice, the LAPD was left with an impossible, sterilized puzzle. The killer of William Desmond Taylor vanished into the fog of Hollywood's elite, taking the motive directly to the grave. The 1930s, the Brighton trunk horror and the unclaimed torso. As the Great Depression ravaged the globe in the 1930s, the criminal underworld became increasingly desperate and remarkably brutal. In June 1934, the left luggage office at the Brighton railway station in England became the epicenter of a forensic nightmare. The railway porters had noticed a severe, putrid odor emanating from a large, unclaimed plywood trunk that had been sitting in the sweltering summer heat for weeks. When Chief Inspector Bob Donaldson of the local constabulary finally pried the locks open, he was met with a scene of staggering surgical brutality. Inside the trunk was the heavily decomposed, dismembered torso and legs of a young woman. Her head and arms had been cleanly severed and were completely missing, intentionally removed to prevent any possibility of dental or fingerprint identification. The post-mortem examination was conducted by the legendary forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury. He deduced that the victim was in her mid-20s, roughly 5 months pregnant, and had been dismembered by someone possessing distinct anatomical knowledge. The press immediately dubbed her the girl with the pretty feet, due to the uncalloused, delicate structure of her toes, suggesting she may have been a dancer. Scotland Yard launched a massive nationwide dragnet. They tracked down the manufacturer of the plywood trunk. They interviewed thousands of missing persons' families, and they monitored every train line out of Brighton. But the killer had executed a flawless forensic countermeasure. By removing the head and hands, and by coating the remains in olive oil to temporarily suppress the smell of decay during transport, the murderer ensured that the victim became a total ghost. To this day, over 90 years later, the identity of the pregnant woman in the trunk remains entirely unknown. No one ever claimed her. No one ever reported her missing. The phantom killer simply walked into a crowded railway station, dropped a trunk containing a human being, and disappeared into the crushing poverty of 1930s England. The 1940s, Georgette Bauerdorf, and the predecessor to the Black Dahlia. The 1940s in Los Angeles are forever defined by the brutal, surgical 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia. But 3 years prior, a terrifyingly similar unsolved murder established a psychological pattern that completely paralyzed the LAPD. This is the case of Georgette Bauerdorf, a wealthy 20-year-old oil heiress and socialite who volunteered at the famous Hollywood canteen, entertaining soldiers returning from the Pacific Theater. On the morning of October 12, 1944, Georgette was found dead in her lavish West Hollywood apartment. The crime scene was a masterclass in psychological terror. The killer had unscrewed the automatic porch light bulb to ensure darkness before breaking in. Georgette had been severely battered, sexually assaulted, and ultimately strangled. Her body was found face down in her overflowing bathtub. The killer then stole her vehicle, abandoning it miles away on the streets of Los Angeles. The forensic connections to the future Black Dahlia case are highly disturbing. Both Georgette Bauerdorf and Elizabeth Short were stunning, dark-haired women in their early 20s. Both were intimately connected to the military personnel at Camp Cook. Both frequented the exact same Hollywood nightclubs. Both were subjected to extreme, highly personalized violence by a predator who demonstrated immense physical control. The LAPD chased hundreds of leads, tracking down soldiers Georgette had danced with and interviewing maintenance workers at her building. They found a bloody handprint on the wall and an unidentifiable fingerprint on the unscrewed light bulb. But the databases of the 1940s were entirely analog and fragmented. The fingerprints matched absolutely no one in the local system. The media dubbed the phantom predator the werewolf killer, a moniker used to describe a series of unsolved slayings of young women in LA during that era. The killer of Georgette Bauerdorf was never identified, leaving criminal profilers to forever debate whether the man who drowned the young heiress was the exact same monster who would surgically bisect Elizabeth Short just 39 months later. As America transitioned into the post-war economic boom, the nature of violent crime evolved. The predators became highly organized, utilizing the expanding interstate systems and the bureaucratic blind spots of local police departments. This era birthed the modern serial killer and showcased the terrifying reality of deeply entrenched political corruption. The 1950s, the judge who sentenced himself. The 1950s presented a facade of absolute legal order, but the 1955 disappearance of Judge Curtis Chillingworth shattered that illusion, proving that the highest levels of the justice system were vulnerable to the deepest levels of criminal depravity. Judge Chillingworth was a highly respected, completely untouchable senior judge in Palm Beach County, Florida. On the night of June 14, 1955, he and his wife Marjorie attended a dinner party, returned to their isolated waterfront mansion in Manalapan, and were never seen again. When a carpenter arrived the next morning, he found the front door hanging open, the television still running, and the judge's keys sitting in the ignition of his vehicle. But it was the blood on the wooden walkway leading down to the private beach that confirmed a violent abduction. The state of Florida erupted into absolute panic. The governor deployed massive resources, assuming the judge had been targeted by the mafia or a high-level smuggling syndicate. The terrifying truth would not surface for years, and it revealed a conspiracy of absolute betrayal. The architect of the abduction was not a mob boss. It was a fellow judge. Joseph Peel was a deeply corrupt municipal judge who had been heavily reprimanded by Chillingworth for unethical behavior and accepting bribes from local moonshiners. Knowing that Chillingworth was building a dossier to permanently disbar him, Peel essentially sentenced himself to a life of paranoia and ruin by ordering a preemptive strike. He hired 2 local hitmen, Floyd "Lucky" Holzapfel and Bobby Lincoln. Under the cover of darkness, they forced the Chillingworths into a small boat at gunpoint. After drifting miles out into the Atlantic Ocean, they strapped heavy lead weights to the couple and threw them overboard alive. While Joseph Peel was eventually convicted years later based on the taped confessions of his hitmen, the bodies of Curtis and Marjorie Chillingworth were never recovered from the crushing depths of the Atlantic. It remains one of the most chilling assassinations of a sitting judge in American history. The 1960s, Cheri Jo Bates, and the genesis of the Zodiac. The late 1960s in California were defined by the cryptic, taunting terror of the Zodiac killer. But forensic profilers and historical investigators point to a brutal, unsolved murder in 1966 as the highly probable, unconfirmed genesis of the Zodiac's reign. On Halloween weekend, October 30th, 1966, 18-year-old Cheri Jo Bates left the library at Riverside City College. When she attempted to start her lime green Volkswagen Bug in the dark, isolated parking lot, the engine failed. The killer had meticulously, intentionally disabled the distributor coil, essentially setting a mechanical trap. The telemetry of the crime scene indicates the killer approached her, offered assistance, and lured her into a dark dirt alleyway nestled between 2 abandoned houses. The violence that followed was explosive and absolute. Cheri Jo was slashed multiple times with a short-bladed weapon and nearly decapitated. The killer was highly disorganized in his frenzy, leaving behind a massive amount of physical evidence: a military-issue Timex watch ripped from his wrist during the struggle, a size 10 heel print from a military boot, and skin cells trapped beneath Cheri Jo's fingernails. A month later, the Riverside police and the local press received identical typewritten letters featuring chilling, misogynistic language. The author claimed responsibility, stating, "She had to die. There will be more." 6 months later, a macabre poem describing a violent murder was found carved into a wooden desk in the college library. When the Zodiac killer officially emerged in Vallejo and San Francisco in 1968, his letters, his linguistic patterns, and his psychological need to taunt the press perfectly mirrored the Riverside Phantom. While modern DNA testing on the Riverside letters in 2021 proved inconclusive, leaving Cheri Jo Bates officially unrecognized by law enforcement as a definitive Zodiac victim, the case remains a terrifying, open wound. It is the perfect blueprint of an apex predator learning how to hunt, making mistakes, and vanishing into the California darkness to refine his terrifying craft. The 1970s, the boy in the box, and the decade of forensic despair. The timeline of The Boy in the Box is a crushing testament to the psychological toll that unsolved crimes inflict on the detectives who work them. The naked, heavily battered body of a young boy, aged 4 to 6, was originally discovered in a J.C. Penney bassinet box in the freezing woods of Philadelphia in February 1957. But it was throughout the 1970s that this case evolved into a nationwide obsession and a symbol of absolute forensic despair. As the original detectives began to age and retire in the 70s, they refused to let the boy be forgotten. They paid for the upkeep of his unmarked grave out of their own pockets. They funded expensive early facial reconstructions. They relentlessly chased down thousands of false leads, interviewing foster homes and orphanages across the eastern seaboard. The absolute cruelty of the case was the complete lack of identity. How does a child simply cease to exist without a single teacher, neighbor, or doctor reporting him missing? The boy's identity was completely erased, his hair crudely chopped off post-mortem in a desperate attempt by his killer to hide his appearance. It wasn't until December 2022, 65 years after his discovery, that advanced genetic genealogy finally pierced the darkness, giving the boy his name back, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But while the archive finally secured his name, the 1970s obsession remains entirely unresolved. The authorities now know exactly who Joseph was, but the individuals who brutalized him, starved him, and threw him away in a cardboard box are long dead. The legal justice system completely failed Joseph Zarelli. His killers escaped the jurisdiction of the courts, leaving behind a legacy of absolute silence that continues to haunt the Philadelphia Police Department to this very day. In the final tier of our forensic timeline, we enter the modern era. The databases are digitized, DNA is a viable weapon, and the FBI's behavioral analysis unit is highly active. Yet, despite these massive technological leaps, the predators simply adapted, utilizing the sprawling interstate highways and the psychological vulnerabilities of modern society. The 1980s and beyond. The I-70 killer. The 1980s birthed the terrifying archetype of the highly mobile interstate serial killer. Predators who utilized the sprawling American highway system to cross jurisdictional lines before local police could even establish a crime scene. This transient psychological profile reached its absolute, terrifying apex in the spring of 1992 with the emergence of the phantom known as the I-70 killer. Over a span of just 29 days, a single, highly organized predator traveled along the Interstate 70 corridor, striking in Indianapolis, Wichita, Terre Haute, and St. Charles, Missouri. His target profile was incredibly specific and deeply disturbing. He hunted young, petite women with long, dark hair who were working alone in small, specialty retail stores located in strip malls, highly visible from the highway. The killer did not rob the stores for profit. The theft was a mere afterthought. He did not sexually assault his victims. He entered the stores in broad daylight, engaged the women in brief conversation, forced them to the back rooms, and executed them with a single shot to the back of the head. The ballistics evidence left behind was completely unique in the history of American serial murder. The killer utilized incredibly rare copper-clad CCI .22 long rifle bullets fired from an obscure, highly specialized weapon, likely a customized Irma Werke Model ET-22 pistol or an Intratec TEC-22. The weapon was specifically chosen for its low decibel output and lack of recoil, allowing the killer to execute his victims with surgical, military precision. The only break in the case occurred when the killer accidentally targeted a store containing a male employee with long dark hair, whom he shot. But the man miraculously survived and provided a highly detailed composite sketch. Despite having the ballistics profile, a clear physical description, and the geographical mapping of his route, the FBI task force hit an absolute dead end. The I-70 killer's ballistics have been entered into the ATF's National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, NIBIN, and the file remains active today. The terrifying reality is that a man who executed 6 people for the sheer psychological thrill of the kill simply got back in his car, merged onto the interstate, and vanished into the American heartland. The 1990s, the Springfield 3, and the deleted tape. We close our timeline in the 1990s, an era characterized by suburban security and the rise of digital communication. But on June 7, 1992, in the quiet city of Springfield, Missouri, a triple disappearance completely shattered that security, becoming one of the most agonizing, high-profile mysteries of the decade. A case so bizarre, it continues to inspire modern true crime documentaries and streaming series. It was the night of high school graduation. Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall had spent the evening celebrating at various house parties. Around 2:15 a.m., they drove back to the home of Susie's mother, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, to sleep. When friends arrived the next morning to check on them, they walked into a deeply unsettling, paradoxical crime scene. The front porch globe light had been completely shattered, the glass scattered across the concrete. The front door was unlocked. Inside the house, the physical telemetry made absolutely no sense. There was zero sign of a struggle. The beds had been slept in. The women's purses containing their driver's licenses, cash, and cigarettes were lined up perfectly side by side on the floor. The family dog, Cinnamon, was highly agitated, pacing frantically in the living room. The Springfield Police Department's initial investigation was a forensic disaster. Because the friends who discovered the scene did not immediately realize a crime had occurred, They actively cleaned up the shattered glass on the porch and wiped down surfaces inside the house, completely destroying any potential fingerprints or DNA. But the most devastating failure involved the answering machine. A friend checking the machine accidentally deleted a cryptic, highly disturbing message left by an unidentified male caller, erasing what could have been the only audio evidence of the abductor. The Springfield Three vanished without a single drop of blood being spilled. Over the next 3 decades, theories exploded across the true crime community. The most pervasive and chilling theory involves a local hospital parking garage that was under construction at the exact time of the disappearance, with informants alleging the 3 women were executed and permanently entombed within the poured concrete foundation. Despite ground-penetrating radar scans and massive excavations, no trace of Susie, Stacy, or Cheryl has ever been found. It is a locked-room mystery on a massive scale, 3 women swallowed by the earth in a matter of hours, leaving behind nothing but a shattered porch light and a broken tape. When we pull the files from these 8 decades of criminal history, we are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality. The justice system is not a flawless machine. It is a fragile human construct, heavily susceptible to corruption, bad timing, forensic limitations, and the sheer, calculated brilliance of highly organized predators. The killers in these files did not possess supernatural abilities. They were flesh and blood. They simply understood the exact geometry of the blind spots in our society. They knew when to strike, they knew how to sanitize the scene, and they knew exactly when to walk away. These cases remain open in the databases, serving as cold, static reminders that sometimes the monster actually wins. If this deep dive into a century of classified, unresolved history disturbed your psychological profile, hit that subscribe button and join us here at the Wayne Archive. We will continue to tear open the boxes they tried to seal, analyzing the impossible variables of the darkest crimes in human history. Review the telemetry, trace the timeline, and drop a comment below to tell me which decade produced the most terrifying mystery. Thank you for stepping into the vault. And remember, just because the calendar turns doesn't mean the phantom is dead.